Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to It's Good to Know with Rabbi Manis Friedman, who I'm going to refer to from now on as my father, or Tati. I am Yossi Friedman. I live here in Birmingham, Alabama, and I have the opportunity to spend some time talking to my father about a very important topic. Here in Alabama, as I'm sure elsewhere, there are a great number of people breaking down the doors of synagogues and Chabad houses and rabbis everywhere. And they're people who are not born Jewish, who are not raised in the Jewish tradition, but who have discovered the Torah in any number of different ways and are coming to learn about what God has to say to the whole world. This is not a new idea. It's mentioned in Jewish literature throughout the ages that there is a Jewish way of connecting to God through the Torah, and there is a non-Jewish way of connecting to God through the Torah. What does that mean? How does that work? Does that mean that everybody's Jewish? Does that mean that nobody can become Jewish? There's a lot of questions about what this means. So with Rabbi Friedman, we have decided to talk about this idea of the connection to God that somebody born non-Jewish has. It's usually referred to as the 7 universal divine paths, the 7 mitzvahs of the Noahide, which of course is a misleading title, as we'll get to in a moment. But this is what people hear about. This is what people learn about. The Jews have their mitzvahs and the Gentiles have their mitzvahs. What does that mean? How does that work? Tai, you talk a lot about a relationship to God and how the whole purpose of creation is for us to have a relationship with God. So let's talk a little bit about what that means for a Noahide, for somebody who is connected to God through the path of Noah rather than through the path of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's on a biological level. On a spiritual level, who knows what that means. Traditionally, we are told that there are 7 such mitzvahs, thus the 7 universal paths. But of course, there's a lot more to it than just that. How much more? Where does it take you? So, Tati, what do we say to a non-Jew who says, do I have to become Jewish to serve God? Or on the other hand, what do I say to somebody who says, how come you tell me I don't have to be Jewish? Do you want me to take the easy way out? Is this a cop-out? Only 7 commandments? Only a different way of serving God? What is God's response to this dilemma? What does it mean to be a non-Jew who serves God? Hopefully, today's discussion will talk about the whole idea and at least the foundation of the code, which is, of course, to serve God. What that means, how we do that. And next week, we'll get together and round out the discussion on these mitzvahs, on these commandments for the whole world. And the following week, we'll have a chance to answer questions. If anybody has questions during these discussions, feel free to send them in. Okay? So, the 7 universal divine paths, what does it mean to serve God in today's world?
So let's get right to the heart of the issue of conversion. Anyone, it seems like, anyone who wants can voluntarily take upon themselves the 613 mitzvahs of the Jewish people. They can convert and become a Jew. It seems that way. But when you look at it and think about it a little more deeply, this is not an option. No Jew is Jewish by option. The nature and the definition of a Jew is someone who is born Jewish, not chooses to be Jewish. So there is an expression used by some authorities, some spokespeople, referring to converts as Jews by choice, as if that's some kind of a compliment. But if there are Jews by choice, and then, of course, there are Jews who had no choice, then we have two different people, two different peoples, two different nations. Jews by choice and Jews without choice. That's not a good idea. There's only one kind of Jew, and that's without a choice. So a convert, and you can ask any person who is a sincere convert, why did you convert? They don't have a very good reason. They have no reason at all. They had no choice. They felt compelled. They couldn't live with themselves until they converted. Something drove them, something irresistible that they couldn't fight, which means they're destined to convert. But if a person wants to become Jewish for obvious reasons, that's not conversion. That's looking for some of the benefits of the mitzvahs, of the lifestyle, of the Torah, which you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy. And that's why we discourage conversion, because a real convert can't be discouraged. So that's the measure. That's the acid test. If you can be discouraged, then you're not destined. And if you're not destined, then it's not a real conversion. On the other hand, as you were mentioning, the world would not be complete if everyone was Jewish. So let's look at the history of it and develop this idea step by step. Adam and Eve were not Jewish. They were perhaps the holiest people who ever lived. The holiest. And I'm talking about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Adam and Eve were holier. But they weren't Jewish. God gave them 6 commandments. Not the one about the tree. 6 commandments that apply to everybody in the Garden of Eden or outside the Garden of Eden. Those 6 commandments were not to worship an idol, not to be blasphemous or disrespectful of God's name, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to kidnap or steal, and to establish courts of law. The court of law is to teach the other 5, and to enforce them. That's how it was for 1,000 years. In the times of Noah, God added a 7th commandment. Because after the flood, humans were permitted to eat meat. And to prevent unnecessary cruelty to the animal, God added a 7th commandment, and that is not to eat meat that came from a living animal. Those are the 7 universal mitzvahs. But the 7 for non-Jews is like the 10 for Jews. The 10 commandments that Moses came down off the mountain with, inscribed in stone, is not the sum total. It's more like a salesman's sample.
The elevator pitch.
They're representative of all the mitzvahs, but in fact, Jews have 613 mitzvahs. The same is true with non-Jews. Seven mitzvahs is not the sum total. How many exactly there are, I've never really sat down to count them, but 300 in that vicinity. So, what is the difference between commandments given to non-Jews and commandments given to Jews? They're God's commandments. And it can't be that a human being lives 80, 90, 100 years on earth and fulfills 7 commandments. That's it. And the 7 commandments are pretty much thou shalt not. That is not a lifestyle of holiness. So, of course, there has to be much more to it. We are born, created to serve God. That means every minute. Every minute that God gives us, every minute of life, we can serve God. So, there's got to be more to a person's life than don't misbehave in 7 ways. Just realistic, practical, pragmatically. And of course, it's true. We dedicate our lives to the service of God. So why then is there a difference between Jews and non-Jews? And it's a significant difference, not a numbers game. You have 300, we have 600, ha ha ha. It's not numbers. We're going to have to repeat this a few times in the course of our conversations because it's radical and it's important. Radical because people don't hear about it. We are here to serve God. We're going to say that 1,000 times. What does that mean? What are you doing for Him? To serve God means to do something for Him. What are we doing for Him? We depend on Him. We rely on Him. We need Him. Can't function without Him. We're doing for Him. Seems like He's doing everything for us. And that attitude is the sum and substance of most religions. We need Him, we depend on Him, you better be nice, maybe He'll help you out. He'll save you, He'll reward you, He'll enlighten you, whatever it is. What are we doing for Him? What do we mean when we say serve Him? And today, by the way, I'm sure you've seen this, there has never been so many people who are sincerely and desperately trying to find a way to serve God. They're not asking God for blessings. They're not asking God for wealth. They're not asking God for anything except the opportunity to serve Him. It's a beautiful thing. It tells us that Mashiach must be very close, or that we must be pretty ready. But that is a beautiful thing. We want to serve God. What does that mean? What can we do for Him? What we can do for Him is fulfill the purpose for which He created the world in the first place. He created the world because He wants to be present on earth, and He needs us to bring heaven down to earth. not to get ourselves to heaven, but to bring heaven down to earth, so that he can be the master of his own creation. But that means that the creation is responding to him, the creation being people. We are the world. Remember the song? Yes, we are the world. So the world becoming godly means people. Voluntarily responding to God's initiative. Bringing heaven down to earth. Well, there are two ways that that can happen. You've got to make earth more hospitable for godliness, and you have to bring God to this appealing world. We read in today's Torah portion, this week's Torah portion, the Jews worked very hard. The entire book of Exodus is a painstakingly careful description, minutely describing how to build a sanctuary, what it's made of, what the dimensions are, which comes first, which comes second, where you place them, what you do with them, how you... Amazing, amazing detail. And the Jews went to work on this, and they donated everything, and they put their best talents to work, and they finally completed this incredible, holy tent of meeting, where God meets with the world, primarily Moses. So now that it's all done, they have to inaugurate it. They have to sanctify all of the articles, all of the furnishings, all the garments, and the Kohanim, the priests. They all have to be initiated into the service. And they are. Now everything is done, everything is complete. But God was not felt or seen in the sanctuary. So the people come to Moses and they say, was all this in vain? Is God not going to be among us? Is God not going to be down to earth in this very physical structure? And Moshe says, oh yes, he will. But it takes Aaron to make it happen. When he lights the menorah, when he offers the bread and the sacrifices and everything else, then God will appear and God will be present. It's almost like we prepared the world, but now we've got to invite God. So to bring heaven and earth together involves two projects. How do we get God to come down, so to speak? And how do we get the world to rise so that they meet in a mutual, two-way relationship? Not God forcing himself into the world, and not the world perfecting itself endlessly and never getting the guest that we're expecting. Although there is crossover, but primarily, Jews are meant to represent God, to bring godliness down to the earth. The nations of the world are meant to elevate the world towards God. That makes the coming together a real, true, intimate joining. It can't be just one way. How significant is this difference? Well, the ability to turn the physical world into something receptive of godliness is a very different talent than the ability to appeal to God and get him to invest himself into his creation. It's a different talent. It's a different job. It's a different form of holiness or godliness, and it's a different service. Although we're both serving him, his plan. Does that sound like something people can relate to?
I'm trying to hear it through the ears of, first of all, a Jewish community, Jewish people who maybe this might be a radical idea because maybe Jews throughout the ages have just wished for the non-Jews to just get out of the way, like stop,
Interfering.
interfering with us. We just finished Purim, right? So okay, Haman, disappear, just do us a favor and go away. And so the idea that we're supposed to partner with the nations of the world might be a novel idea to many, a new idea to many Jews. And then trying to hear it through the ears of a non-Jew who says, wait a minute, are you saying that there's no difference between Jews and non-Jews, or a slight difference between Jews and non-Jews? Am I Jewish? Am I Jewish with a Southern accent? I mean, what are you saying about this? We're both serving God. It's sort of in the same way. So then why must there be Jews and non-Jews? Just let's all be. You said something about non-Jews elevating the world up towards God, but of course the Jewish people do that as well, right? God comes down to Mount Sinai, but Moses has to go up Mount Sinai.
But Moses himself says, I stood between you and God that day to bring the word of God to you. That was the main thing. Going up to the mountain, it was only to come back down with the 10 Commandments. So yes, it is a subtle difference, but it's a major difference. Let's try it again. A Jew is meant to bring God from heaven to earth. In order to do that, what would it take? Well, first of all, you have to represent God, not earth. You have to represent God to the earth, which means you have to be closer to God than you are to the earth. Otherwise, you're not bringing anything new to the world. That's why Jews have a divinely separated, or somehow a piece of God that makes their soul what it is. If you're going to bring God into this world, you got to be a piece of God. And that's why people who hate God vent all their frustrations on the Jews. Because we represent God. Well, that famous philosopher who told the king, what is the proof that there is a God? The Jews. So, in order to bring God down, you have to be a little piece of him, representing him to the world, and not so much a part of the world. We'll get back to that in a second. On the other hand, if your job is to elevate the world, then you have to represent the world to God more than representing God to the world. So you have to be the world. Otherwise, you can't elevate it. You can't be a stranger to the world and yet have that kind of an effect on it. You got to be the world, you got to represent the world, and you got to elevate it to where it is receptive to godliness. That's why when the Torah refers to other nations other than Jews, how are they described? Nations of the world. Some part of anti-Semitism, by the way, the more subtle form, is that feeling that the world that we're in is a non-Jewish world. And the presence of Jews in this non-Jewish world is uncomfortable. What are you doing here? If you're a heavenly people, go to heaven. Earth is for us. There's some truth to that. And that's why we have to identify ourselves as the messengers from God to the world, a light to the nations. Otherwise, what are we doing here? But that feeling that earth belongs to human beings and Jews have no business being here means that the world will never become godly. People today aren't accepting that. And that's why there is less anti-Semitism than ever before. Because it makes sense. We are the world. We are looking to connect God. Doesn't God send us something, a message, a teaching, a messenger? So we're trying our best. Is God responding? Is God doing his part? The answer is yes. God chose the Jewish people and gave them this mission to bring him to the people, bring him to the world. That's a significant thing. So, God creates the world, and there are no Jews. Jews are not part of creation. That's strange. Both for the Jew and for the non-Jew. What? Adam and Eve were not Jews. Noah was not a Jew. For 2,000 years after creation, after Adam and Eve, there are no Jews. It's a non-Jewish world. Some of them were good. Most of them were not. Because it takes some time to learn how to live in this world just as a human being. So Adam and Eve were very holy people, not Jewish. Noah was a tzaddik, found favor in God's eyes, not a Jew. And then came Abraham, 2,000 years later. Actually, when was his birthday?
1948.
He was born in the year 1948 after Adam and Eve. So just about 2,000 years later. And all of a sudden, he's a Jew. Which tells you Jews came with a message to the world. We're not exactly the world. So the nations of the world, that's where God wants to be, present. And it is not something new. Jews always knew this. We didn't know what to do about it because nobody was listening. But 3 times a day in every prayer of every day of the year, without exception, we say the Oleinu, the conclusion of every prayer, 3 times a day, 4 times on special days, 5 times on Yom Kippur. And what does it say in the Oleinu? That we are looking forward. We are trusting, we are yearning, we are looking forward to a time when the world will be great. What's going to be great? The evil people of the world will turn to God, and all the nations will serve God. They will all recognize the God of Israel. The utopian picture is not Jews doing well. The utopian picture is nations of the world doing well, because that's bringing heaven down to earth. Is that like insignificant? You can even make the argument the opposite. We are a light to the nations. Why, don't we exist for ourselves? We're only here to be of a service to the other nations. It's like the old question of who is more important, the teacher or the student? In a shallow world and materialistic thinking, the teacher is more important. Teacher has the authority. He's telling you. He can throw you out of the classroom. Teacher gets all the respect. On the other hand, the teacher is good for one thing: to educate the student, to tell the student what the student needs to know, to answer the student's questions, to make something out of the student, not to make a living for himself. That's why teachers get paid so little. Really, terribly.
Right. So really, I've heard from many people the actual experience. They'll come to a synagogue and they'll say, "Teach me Torah," and the rabbi will say, "You're not Jewish. Go away." Right? Yeah. Why are you coming here? And they're hurt, and they're honestly pained by it. And so we as teachers, as guides, we have to get better at it. But then we also need to know what is it that we're teaching. So when we talk about the 7 mitzvahs, and you said, of course, that they're sort of the all-encompassing guidelines. We obviously Cain and Hevel brought sacrifices. Noach brought sacrifices. These are not part of the 7 mitzvahs. Cain did teshuvah. He repented. Right? There's that interesting medrash about Cain when he was banished, and he's leaving. He has to leave home, and his father meets him and says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Well, you wouldn't believe what just happened. Whatever, my brother, and I'm banished." And Adam says, "Only banished? A murderer? That's all you get?" He said, "Well, I repented." And Adam says, "I didn't know you could do that. Had I known." So teshuvah is part of the Noahide code. So there's so much more than just these 7 things. But can we find all of these 300 or whatever mitzvahs? Can we find them in these 7? Can we talk about sort of an overarching approach to serving God in these 7?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. In fact, we can break it down into 2 categories to begin with, and that is the mitzvahs that we do between us and God, and the mitzvahs that we do between people to people. There's one other thought here. 613 commandments were given to Jewish males, Jewish men. Jewish women have 14 commandments that they're not obligated to keep. So they have 599. Why is that? To give them time off? To go to Pilates and to yoga? There's no time off. Because women will be busy with their children. And that is serving God. Well, you can't serve God two ways at the same time. So God says, you're going to be busy serving me full time. So I can't expect you to run off to the synagogue 3 times a day, because what if your kids are having a tantrum?
Teething.
Teething. So apply the same idea to nations of the world. It's not that you have 7 commandments and the rest of the time you can do whatever you want. Just don't misbehave. You are here to make the world inhabitable, to make the world a place where people and God can get together. If people are hungry, they can't think of God. If people are at war, they cannot think of God. If people are competing, if they're jealous, in other words, making life livable is serving God. Interesting how the Torah just drops these little comments. Tuval Kayin. Oh, he's the one who invented musical instruments. Or is that a mitzvah? Noah invented the plow. Is that a mitzvah? Anything you do to make life more livable, not frivolous, livable. You have to plow. That was part of the curse, right? By the sweat of your brow you make bread. So you got to plow. Who invented the plow? Was that a mitzvah? It's not a commandment on everyone to invent the same piece of equipment. But anything we do that makes life more livable, that is serving God. In some way, people who are into the environment, protecting the environment, saving the environment, they're turning it into a religion. But in principle, that is serving God. And I asked this very devoted environmentalist, what are you doing? He says, it's our responsibility. We're the caretakers of the earth, and we have to put it in good shape. I said, who cares? Who cares? So, well, the next generation, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So you know who really cares? The Creator. It's His world. So we talk about tikkun olam, fixing the world. For whom? For the Creator, who's got the biggest investment and the greatest interest in seeing this world become what it's supposed to be. So the reason non-Jews have fewer ritual mitzvahs is because taking care of the world is a full-time job. So Jewish women get some mitzvahs, some fewer mitzvahs, because they have to take care of their own children. Non-Jews get many more leniencies because they got to take care of the whole world. So it's not like you get free time. You're serving God every minute of your existence.
A novel idea for many people that serving God includes when I go to work, how I raise my family, how I treat my friends, my neighbors, and so on, that it doesn't have to be, thou shalt do such and such, but that serving God is all encompassing.
If you find a way to provide clean water, that's not a mitzvah? I mean, aside from the fact that people are dying from thirst and you're helping them, just the fact that you don't have to schlep the water on your shoulders from the river to your house, but you invented pipes that will bring the water, that is not making the world a better world? Having facilities in your house instead of outhouses, is that not making the world a better place? More godly? Of course it is. Inventing a light bulb so people can see what they're doing? So, yes, that is serving God directly. Because when people can live, then they can serve. When they can't live, they're distracted. And that's really why we need peace. Real peace.
Right.
Not even Cold Wars.
Right.
We need real peace so that we can serve God with presence of mind, thoughtfully, meaningfully, without looking over our shoulders all the time to see who's attacking whom. So, to make the world capable of responding to God's interest, to God's investment, it's a full-time job. So going back to that idea that, 7 commandments in 80 years? No, that can't be. And that's what people are asking for. I want to serve God with my life, not in my free time. And God is saying, you don't have any free time. One more thought along this line. Non-Jews are not allowed to observe Shabbos. Why? Because Shabbos means that for 24 hours you don't do anything to improve the world. Who fired you and who relieved you of your responsibility? Why do Jews get to take 24 hours off? Because you're not supposed to be working the world, you're supposed to be working godliness. And you do have to make a living, so during the week, you can be part of fixing the world. But remember what your job is. One day out of the week, focus on God. So it all comes together and it all fits. So, is there a major difference? There's a huge difference. You need a different soul in order to accomplish these different missions. You need a soul that is of earth to make the earth better, and you need a soul that is of God to make God present in his world. Huge difference. And yet we're doing the same thing. Serving God in one project. That's what we say when Mashiach comes, all nations will serve God with one shoulder.
Yeah. That's the joke I always tell of these two guys who are helping a buddy move a couch, and they're stuck in a doorway, and they're schwitzing and they're grunting and and finally one of them says, "We're never going to get this out." And his friend says, out. If you're not pushing in the same direction.
No wonder. Right. If we don't know what we're doing, we're not doing it well.
So the idea, first of all, that God cares about the world, about the success of the world, that we're doing it for God because God needs us to be successful. This is, of course, a subject that has been discussed at great length, especially in the VIP chats that you have with so many people. And maybe now would be a good time to thank all the VIPs who join and have these amazing conversations about our connection to God and how much God needs us to be successful in bringing God to this world and bringing the world up to meet God. And if you're watching this and you're not yet a VIP, you can always go to it's good to know.org and join. But for tonight, let's talk about these 7 mitzvahs, or all of the mitzvahs that come with them, and how does that change a person who is aware of this connection to God? How does that change his daily life? How does that make her different in doing exactly what you just described, making the world a better place? Do I need to be aware that I'm doing it for God? And does that bring us into the first of the commandments?
Okay, so let's say there's a human being somewhere in the world who does not worship idols, is not blasphemous, doesn't murder, doesn't steal, doesn't commit adultery, doesn't eat a limb from a living animal, and enforces the laws.
And works to bring clean water and helps the poor and honors his parents, and right?
But he's totally unaware of the Torah. He's totally unaware of the Mount Sinai event. He's totally unaware of God's interest. That's a good person. That is not a servant of God. He happens to be doing all the right things. And, he deserves some credit for that. But that's not what people are asking for. People are asking, what is the purpose of my existence? Of course, I'll be good. But for what? So to answer that question, a very painful question, by the way.
For what?
Why am I here? You don't hear much about that, which is frustrating even young people. All you tell me is what I must do and what I must not do. I don't even know why I'm here. You walk into a classroom and you have to fill this assignment, and you have to sit in your seat, and you have to move from this room to that room, and you have to pass a test, and you have to get a... Whoa, 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 whoa. Why am I in school? I don't even know why I'm here, and I've got this burden, endless responsibilities, instructions. Don't do that. Go here, go there. Can anybody tell me why I'm in this building in the first place? So the righteous Gentile, and this is also very significant, is not just somebody who happens to behave properly. It's someone who behaves in the way that they behave because they're interested in serving God and doing something that they were created to do. How do we know this? Where do we find out what we are created to do? In the Torah. So Moses has to be the teacher and the source of inspiration in order for a non-Jew to be a righteous Gentile. But if you don't know from Moses what God commands non-Jews, then you're a nice guy, but that's not good enough. Now, let's take that a step further. The Hebrew describing righteous Gentiles.
Just thinking that. Chassidei Umo Yisraelim. Gentile is a goyish word.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
But what would be the Hebrew equivalent for righteous?
Tzaddik.
There are the righteous of the world, and there are the Chasidei Umay Sa'ilam.
So now you're gonna mix everybody up when you're gonna say, don't bother being a tzaddik, be a chassid.
And the difference being?
Well, somehow you made it sound like you can be a tzaddik without knowing it, without knowing who you're serving.
Right. Right. Tzaddik means righteous. You do all things right. For whom? I don't know. It's your personality. It's your tradition from Noah. It's rational. It's good for the world. But to be a chassid means to go beyond what is right into serving whom you're serving. So righteous is about things. Is this right? Is that wrong? Chassid means someone. You're serving someone by doing what is right. That's why they're called Chasidei Umay Sa'ilam. Never in history have there been as many Chasidei Umay Sa'ilam as there are today. In the last couple of years, the numbers increased dramatically. Just in the COVID years. Well, think of it this way. There are people who by nature, not by conviction, not by religious faith or belief, just by nature, tell them to shoot a rabbit. They can't do it. They can't. If it's for food, they'll justify it, but it goes against the grain. Then there are people, very sadly, very, very tragically, there are people who will cut off the head of their enemy and celebrate like a bar mitzvah. Are these the same species? We had this bus driver in Minnesota. Remember the guy, the bus driver? City bus driver.
Oh, yeah.
He was accused of running over somebody, and they hauled him into court. And he said, "When did this happen? And where did this happen?" And it turned out that somebody said that the bus was moving, and they were standing next to it, and he hit them. And this was the middle of the day, and he continued driving for the rest of the day. And he said to the judge, "This is ridiculous. When I run over a squirrel, I have to take the rest of the day off." How does that compare to somebody who can cut your head off, put it on video, celebrate it, dance and sing? And if they can do it twice a day, it's even more fun. These are not the same people. The only way to describe it is that there are people who need to decide between doing right and doing wrong. And then there are people who doing wrong is not an option. Who am I serving when I do right? That's the Hasidic Gentile. Because if it's about somebody, then it's Hasidic. If it's about something, then it's righteous. Or wrongness.
So we're talking about serving God. So these already fall into the category of between man and God. Not worshiping idols, not blaspheming, cursing God's name. That would include prayer.
Right.
Would it include taking time for self-introspection? I mean, where do we find these expansions on the Sheva mitzvahs?
Getting to know God is one of the big mitzvahs. Rambam begins with that. Is a non-Jew obligated? Well, of course. If you're not going to serve idols, you got to know who the real God is. So the more you know God, the more you reject the idol. So the study of God, getting to know Him, I don't know if it's called theology, but the knowledge of God is a mitzvah. And you should know and study as much as your intelligence allows. Prayer, yes, of course you have to pray. If you don't mention God and you don't think about God and you don't communicate with God, then you don't have a God for all practical purposes. Even if you say, yeah, I know God created the world. Yeah, but what's it to you? Divine providence, believing that everything happens for a reason and that God is running the show? Of course. If He's not running the show, He's not much of a God. So yes, all of these things kind of flesh out the bare minimum of not worshiping idols. Not being blasphemous. Believing in God sometimes produces a rebellious streak. And there have been people in history, there probably still are people today, who know there's a God, and they hate Him because they feel like they're competing. They resent the fact that God gets all the credit instead of them. So the egomaniacs who want to control the world, who need to conquer the world, they've got a God complex. That's blasphemy. Can't say they don't believe in God, and they're not worshiping idols. They want to be God. Like this guy who said, I thought I was an atheist, but then I realized, no, wait a minute, I'm God. That's blasphemy. So thinking that you can...
It must be very prevalent, at least in a softer manner, for it to be a separate mitzvah by itself.
Oh, yeah.
God is not just talking to the tyrants of the world. He's talking to something within us.
That we can take God lightly, frivolously. That wouldn't do the world any good whatsoever. So in an overarching sense, even belief in God is necessary for the world to be a decent place. It's not otherworldly. It serves the world to believe in its creator, to serve its creator, to know what we're here for. It's just necessary for life itself. So it's not beyond the letter of the law. It's what the world needs. But as you mentioned, I think this is very significant. Why is God giving us laws? What does he care? The very fact that he gives us laws shows an investment, an interest, a purposefulness. You bring a bunch of kids into your house and say, you just do whatever you want, trash the place. They're going to like you for this? They're going to be beholden to you? No. You don't care. Why should they care? But when God says, no, wait. This is a very important project with me here. So don't destroy this, don't mess up that, don't neglect, down to the tiniest detail. The God of Israel is a very invested God. And that's the only thing that makes any sense. You cannot convince me that God, the Father, can't be bothered. Well, then it's all over. If the Father can't be bothered.
So the big idea that I heard tonight is that for the nations of the world to understand that God's vast eternal plan doesn't only include non-Jews, it depends on non-Jews. It's not that we're saying to non-Jews, yeah, come along. We're saying this is the reason God created the world is to have this meeting between heaven and earth.
And you are earth.
And you're making it happen. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding right now as people are listening to this. And I mean, these are discussions that I've had countless times. What does God want me to do? And people who have been religious their whole life, people who have been raised in a religion, they come running and they say, well, if I'm not that religion anymore, then I have to be your religion. Give me a religion. And what we're saying today is stop worrying about religion and start worrying about God.
Life is a religion. That didn't make too much sense, but you know what I'm saying. If we don't get this straight, nothing makes sense. It's not just why is there a difference between Jews and non-Jews. We're back to the original question. What's life all about? Why are we here? What are we doing? The average human being is asking, if I misbehave, I'm going to suffer. Who did this to me? I didn't ask for this. This is not fair. It's not right, and I quit. I don't want to play. I don't like this game. I don't get to choose anything, but if I don't behave, now come on. Some guy is walking past a playground and somebody runs over and tags him out. So, excuse me, I'm not on the team. I'm not playing. I'm on my way home. Leave me alone. You were off the base and I tagged you. You can't do that if I'm not playing. So, if we don't answer that question, we haven't gotten to first base. We're not even in the game. What are we doing here?
So if we know this, if we're aware that we're on God's team, so to speak, God needs us to do this part for Him. So what is the right thing for a non-Jew who wants to express his connection to God, wants to express her love for God, wants to know, should they say Modani? Should they say in their own words? Should one make time to pray certain times of the day? What would be the right thing to do to express this awareness that I'm not doing it for myself, I'm not doing it just because, but I'm doing it for God?
Well, we have an actual commandment to get together 3 times a day, at least 10 men, to do a public prayer. Non-Jews don't have that obligation. Back in the old days when everybody was farming, to get 10 guys together, you have to travel miles because farms were miles apart from each other. And you got to take off in the middle of work and so on. And that work is serving God. So you don't take time off from serving God in order to serve God. But as we have more free time, we should fill it with serving God. So if people want to get together and share a prayer, that would be beautiful. Not obligated. So it would be a custom, freely chosen by the people. Anytime somebody wants to quit and not come, that's fine. But personally, privately, someplace in the course of a day, you have to check in with God. Whether you call it progress report or reality check. But once a day, you have to say something to God. I'm here, I'm working, I'm trying. I had a good day, I had a bad day. That's it. I'll try again tomorrow. That would be wonderful. To go to sleep with a prayer, to wake up with a prayer. The Rebbe campaigned very, very intensely to have public schools where religion is not allowed and God is not allowed, but to have a moment of silence. Tell the students before we begin, think about why you're here and what life is all about. What should you think? Ask your parents. A moment makes a huge difference. So it doesn't have to be a lengthy prayer. It doesn't have to be hours. Just say something. Yeah, prayer is important. What should the prayer be? Well, take a look in a Hebrew prayer book and see what sounds relevant to you. Don't say, oh, we want to thank you for taking us out of Egypt. Obviously.
Psalms, Tehillim.
Beautiful.
David said it best.
Pirkei Avos.
As prayer or a study?
Study.
Okay. So bringing
one of the problems I'm hearing is that people who have been religious are accustomed to having holidays, traditional songs, meeting others for prayer. Now that they're no longer practicing religion and they want to serve God according to the Jewish sources, they don't have a holiday. Their calendar is blank. And they don't have songs. It's painful. And I don't know what the solution is. But how did those songs develop in the religions that you used to be singing?
Somebody felt it. Somebody wrote it.
Somebody wrote it. It wasn't given at Mount Sinai. So it'll take a little while, but people will start writing songs. Should non-Jews celebrate holidays? Well, if it's relevant, yeah. The day that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. This is the Torah that tells us that there are 7 Noahide laws and the rest that every human being should keep. So shouldn't a non-Jew celebrate the day that the Torah was given? The Torah that tells them how to live? Sure they should. Even Shabbat. They're not allowed to observe Shabbat because Shabbat means you're not fixing the world and you have to be fixing the world. But the fact that it's the 7th day, which bears testimony that God created the world in 6 days, is that not relevant to every creature in the world? Even the fish in the ocean celebrate Shabbos. Because they know they were created on the 5th day.
Somebody says, I'm not going to do Shabbos, like you do Shabbos, but I'm sitting down to dinner on Friday night anyway. I'll make it a nicer dinner.
Yes.
Sabbath dinner.
Yes. Yes. Don't treat it like any other day. I just spoke to somebody yesterday who was very sincerely bothered by, he wants to observe Shabbat. He's not Jewish. He wants to observe Shabbat by not spending money. But his family loves to go out to eat. And they've gotten into an argument about it. I said, whoa, your family wants to go out to eat on Shabbat? That's honoring Shabbat. You don't go out during the week. So by all means, go out, have a special meal. It's Shabbat. Or it's the 7th day. You call it whatever you want. But the fact is, it's the day that God rested from creation. That's relevant to you. You're a creation. So the laws of Shabbat are only for Jews. But the day is significant to everybody.
And it's true with Rosh Hashanah?
Absolutely. How could it not be relevant? I mean, today all the nations, on Rosh Hashanah, today all the nations of the world are judged. Right, you don't care? Talking about you. So yes, for sure. Now, exactly how do they mark these days? By blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah? No. Shofar is Jewish. But Rosh Hashanah is universal.
So it sounds like for this, we need rabbis to step up and be there and be available to guide when people ask these questions.
Yes. And many of them are very individual. Like the guy whose family wants to go out to eat in a restaurant on Shabbat. I'm going to make a commandment, you must eat out in an expensive restaurant on Shabbat. But for this family, works. So I guess what the Gentile world has to realize is that worldly affairs, the comforts of this world, we're never meant to be greedy, never meant to be indulgent of the human being. It's a service to the Creator. Now, divine plan has it all worked out as to what kind of contribution each person can and will make to the world, and no human being is unnecessary. So those who invent light bulbs, good for you. Those who invented the plow, great. Those who invented the internet, you think you did it on your own? You're not from the Chasidei Umayis Ha'olam. You had the merit that God allowed you to be the one to bring that into the world. Be grateful and be humbled.
And keep doing it. Don't go looking for religion.
So when a person says, well, what am I supposed to invent? If you're meant to, it will happen. God runs the world after all. But then there are these commandments that you have to consciously choose to do. That's why they're called mitzvahs. But there is a purpose to your existence that happens automatically because God's plan works. So if you compose beautiful music, that's a divine contribution. If you write beautiful, inspiring poems or prose or books, if you encourage people to be optimistic and to be moral and to be loyal and to have healthy families, you're doing God's work. This woman wrote to the Rebbe, I'm observant and I keep these commandments and I keep the Shabbat and I keep kosher. And in my secular life, I'm a child counselor. And the Rebbe said, counseling children is secular? Mm-mm. So everyone does what they can, what they're destined to contribute. But then there's the freedom of choice mitzvah. When do you specifically focus on the fact, I'm going to do something for God? So honoring your parents. In a normal world, who wouldn't honor their parents? So you do it automatically, which is great. But if you stop and think, no, this is a commandment that I am obligated to do, even when I'm not in the mood, even when my parents are a little difficult and don't inspire that kind of respect and awe. But I'll do it because it's important to God. So, to sum it up, any mitzvah that has a practical benefit to life on earth applies to all people. So, for example, men should not wear women's garments and women should not wear men's garments. What is that, just for Jews? No, that makes perfect sense. Honoring your parents makes perfect sense. Charity. Not when your heart is broken and when you see people bleeding in the street. As a daily commitment, who can I help today? Who needs help today? Don't wait until it hits you in the face. It's a mitzvah. You got to be proactive. It makes life on earth livable. Not to bear false witness. I mean, come on. People are going to bear false witness. We might as well just quit. So all of the commandments, no one is punished unless there are two witnesses that you committed the crime. That's absolutely necessary for civilization. So it's one of the commandments, and obviously it applies to everybody, because if not everybody does it, then you have a messed up society. So these are the rational mitzvahs, right? The mishpatim. All of these rational mitzvahs, what makes them rational? You see a benefit to society. Well, then, if you're part of society, you're obligated. Other things like kosher, that's a uniquely Jewish thing. Doesn't benefit society. What about not being cruel to animals?
That's right in there. It's in the code.
Would life not be functional if people were cruel to animals?
It's a short step from being cruel to animals to being cruel to humans.
Mm-hmm. Either you have compassion or you don't have compassion.
Okay, I want to talk actually about all these mitzvahs more, because this is important. But today I heard at least the beginning of an answer to that very important question. As a non-Jew, am I serving God, or are you just driving me crazy? And the very important message is that you're not just also serving God. This is how God created the world, and God needs you to make this work. And by being aware of that, you're on the team. And by living the life that God gave you, you're making the world the kind of world that God wants it to be. So those are the mitzvahs, those are the commandments that God gave to everybody that pertain to our relationship. In other words, humans' relationship to God.
So in the Hebrew, just to make it all authentic, there are what we call the 7 Noahide laws, but then there's also the principle of l'sheves yitzorah, lo l'toihu bra l'sheves yitzorah. The world was not created to be chaotic, it was created to be livable, inhabitable. So anything you do, anything you can do to make the world inhabitable is your purpose in life, the purpose for which you were created. So, for example, be fruitful and multiply. Is that only for Jews?
It was given to non-Jews.
Because be fruitful and multiply, fill the world and conquer it. What does it mean to conquer the world? to be partners with God in making the world holy. You conquer it by overcoming its godlessness and turning it into a godly place. So there's much more to life than decency, although we could use a little more of that.
Thank you. I've learned a lot. This is so important to many people that I talk to. I'm sure many people have questions, and if you have questions, please go to itsgoodtoknow.org and use the Ask the Rabbi button or use the Contact Us button, and we will hopefully get a chance to answer those questions. But so much is yet to be said about the importance of everybody serving God, Shechem Echad, with one shoulder. As somebody once said to me, all of the prophecies that are recorded by our Nevi'im, by Yirmiyahu and Shayo and so on, about the coming of Mashiach, they're not just predictions, they're instructions on how we are supposed to live, even as we are waiting for Mashiach. So people are already living that, people are already turning to Hashem, and we have to be ready to help. We have to be ready to be an Or LaGoyim. And I know that I need to know more so that I can be a good guide.
And speaking of the prophets, how many of their predictions and visions of perfection refer to other nations?
Right. A famous quote on the UN wall: "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation." It's all the nations.
Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a description of the Jewish people.
Right. Or it's necessarily not a description. Okay, Ta, thank you. We'll do this again next week.
Sounds good.
Yirtzeh Hashem, and we'll talk more about all the mitzvahs that come along with making the world. What did you call it? Elevating the world to meet God.
Yes.
Okay? Thank you.